Today I'm going to talk about the famous university and airline bombing case. It became one of the most expensive investigations in the history of the FBI. Many people even described it as the perfect high IQ crime. The suspect was a genius with an IQ of 167. He entered Harvard University at the age of 16 and earned his doctorate at 25. His doctoral dissertation was so advanced that only a handful of people in the United States could understand it at the time. He should have had a brilliant future. So why did he choose to become a bomber? What happened to him along the way? Now, let's go back to 1978 and take another look at the details of this case. On May 25, 1978, during a warm spring day, a brown package arrived at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. The package was addressed to Professor Buckley Christ, a member of the Department of Engineering and Materials Science. Professor Christ was puzzled, as he had not sent or expected any packages. Upon examining the package, he noticed a note warning that it might contain explosives. He immediately notified campus police. When the officers opened the package, it exploded with a loud bang. The officer suffered minor cuts on his left hand, but fortunately there were no serious injuries. The bomb was crude and poorly constructed, so police initially assumed it was a prank. The case was temporarily closed. However, this was just the beginning of a series of bombings. On May 9, 1979, John Harris, a graduate student at Northwestern University, received a package. When he opened it, it exploded. Fortunately, the explosion caused only minor cuts, and no serious injuries occurred. This incident, like the first, did not attract much attention from the police. On November 15, 1979, a plane flying from Chicago to Washington experienced a serious incident. Thick smoke suddenly filled the luggage compartment, forcing the plane to make an emergency landing. A preliminary investigation revealed a package bomb hidden in the luggage compartment. The bomb was powerful enough to destroy the entire plane, but fortunately, the timer malfunctioned, preventing it from detonating. Due to the severity of the incident and the clear threat to public safety, the FBI became involved and established a special investigative task force. Despite the FBI's efforts and a comprehensive investigation, another bombing incident occurred shortly afterward. On the 10th of June, 1980, Percy Wood, president of United Airlines, was injured by a package bomb at his home. The bomb had been hidden inside a hollowed-out book. Before receiving the book, Wood had also received an anonymous warning letter stating that in 2 days he would receive a book of great interest to him. The explosion caused serious injuries. Investigators soon realized that this attack, along with the earlier university mail bombings, were likely the work of the same person. Because the attacks targeted both universities and airline-related figures, the FBI combined the English words university, airline, and bomb to create the code name Unabomber. The media and investigators later referred to the perpetrator as the Unabomber. Over the next 5 years, the Unabomber continued his attacks, despite being under intense FBI surveillance and investigation. On December 11, 1985, in Sacramento, California, 38-year-old computer store owner Hugh Scruton was killed when a bomb exploded in the parking lot outside his shop. This was the first fatality in the series of Unabomber attacks, and investigators noticed that the bomb was far more powerful than previous bombs. The FBI expanded its special task force to over 150 members, including experts from multiple fields. But the Unabomber remained extremely cunning. He built his bombs using common household trash, like discarded cans, bits of plastic, nails, scraps of wood and bark. He even left intentional fingerprints on some components to mislead investigators. Because the bombs contained ordinary materials and the victims shared no clear connection, it became nearly impossible to identify the bomber through forensic analysis alone. The investigation reached a frustrating standstill. In February 1987, another Unabomber attack occurred, again targeting a computer store owner in a parking lot. This time, the bomb was disguised as a piece of wood, but it exploded and caused injuries. For the first time, the police obtained a witness account. The witness described seeing a suspicious man placing a strange package in the parking lot just before the explosion. Based on the witness account, the FBI created a sketch of the Unabomber. The drawing showed a man with a beard, wearing sunglasses, a hooded sweatshirt, and a hat. However, the sketch was too vague to significantly advance the investigation, leaving investigators with little new information. After this attack, the Unabomber disappeared from public view, leading many to believe he had temporarily stopped to avoid being recognized. In June 1993, the Unabomber carried out 2 bombings within 3 days. One victim was a geneticist in California, and the other was a computer science professor at a university in Connecticut. Both were seriously injured. By this time, it had been 15 years since the first campus bombing. Over these 15 years, the FBI noticed that the Unabomber seemed to have an unusual fascination with wood. Many of his bombs were made using branches, bark, and other wooden materials. Beyond this, investigators found no other patterns. The Unabomber randomly selected his victims and frequently left false clues to mislead investigators, forcing them to waste significant time and effort. The case had made little progress, and public anxiety was increasing. Meanwhile, the Unabomber was becoming increasingly brazen. In December 1994, a senior advertising executive was killed by a bomb. In April 1995, a forestry professor was also killed in another bombing. On April 24, 1995, the Unabomber contacted the New York Times and the Washington Post, demanding that they publish his 35,000-word essay, Industrial Society and Its Future. He promised that he would stop his attacks if it was published. On September 19, 1995, at the request of the U.S. Attorney General and the FBI, the Washington Post published the full, unedited essay, Industrial Society and Its Future. Investigators hoped that a reader might recognize the author and provide clues to help identify him. The publication caused a huge public reaction, sparking widespread debate and varying opinions on its content. For a time, the Unabomber became a kind of symbol or inspiration for a small group of people, receiving support from some anarchists and extremist groups. Some extremists even held demonstrations encouraging him to run for U.S. president. But for the FBI, this was not the priority. They issued public appeals, asking the general public to provide useful information based on the published essay. This triggered a flood of tips. Over the course of several months, the FBI received more than 1,000 calls a day. Most of these were motivated by the reward offered, and only a small fraction proved useful. Until one day, David Kaczynski and his wife Linda read the manifesto in the newspaper and noticed that the ideas and writing style were strikingly similar to those of David's brother, Ted Kaczynski. They began to suspect that Ted might be the Unabomber. To be sure, David reviewed letters he had exchanged with Ted and even hired a private investigator. Based on these clues, the investigator became confident that Ted was indeed the Unabomber. David and his mother were deeply distressed by this realization, and they turned over all the evidence and clues to the FBI, ultimately receiving a reward. On April 3, 1996, Ted Kaczynski was arrested in his remote cabin. The FBI found a large quantity of bomb-making materials, nearly 40,000 pages of handwritten journal pages, and a finished bomb ready to be mailed. After nearly 2 decades of investigation, the FBI had finally captured the Unabomber. In April 1996, Ted Kaczynski was formally charged with multiple crimes, including transporting, mailing, and using bombs, as well as murder. Ted's family and lawyers argued that he was mentally ill and attempted to use this to mitigate his sentence. Ted, however, firmly denied any mental illness and even fired his lawyers. On January 22, 1998, Ted pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was ultimately sentenced to 8 consecutive life sentences without parole. According to records, between 1978 and 1995, Ted Kaczynski mailed or delivered 16 bombs, resulting in 3 deaths and 23 injuries of varying severity. During the 17-year investigation, the FBI deployed hundreds of agents, spent over $5 million, interviewed more than 10,000 people, investigated nearly 20,000 leads, and arrested over 200 suspects. A $1 million reward was also offered. The FBI later described the Unabomber case as one of the most expensive investigations in its history. When Ted Kaczynski's identity was revealed, the entire country was shocked because his background and life story were far from ordinary. On May 22, 1942, Ted Kaczynski was born in Chicago, Illinois. He was the son of second-generation Polish-American parents. As a baby, he suffered a severe case of hives and was hospitalized for several weeks. He also had a younger brother, David Kaczynski. Both brothers were highly intelligent from an early age. In 1952, while in 5th grade, Ted took an IQ test that measured his intelligence at 167. For reference, Albert Einstein is often estimated at around 160. Ted's extremely high IQ set him on an unusual academic path. Throughout school, he excelled academically and frequently skipped grades. During middle school, he developed a strong interest in mathematics and quickly mastered advanced coursework. At age 15, he graduated from high school with outstanding grades. In 1958, Ted was admitted to Harvard University at just 16 years old and received a scholarship. At Harvard, he continued to perform exceptionally well. Classmates described him as quiet, introverted, and intellectually gifted, a genuine prodigy. After graduating in 1962 with a bachelor's degree in mathematics, he went on to the University of Michigan for graduate school, earning his master's degree in 1964 and his PhD in 1967. It was said that during his time at Michigan, he solved a mathematical problem in 3 months that had puzzled his advisor for 10 years. His 1967 dissertation, Boundary Functions, won the university's award for Best Mathematics Dissertation. The dissertation was extremely advanced, and even faculty members found it difficult to understand. One mathematician later estimated that perhaps only 10 or 12 mathematicians in the country could fully understand Kaczynski's dissertation. At just 25 years old, Ted Kaczynski became the youngest assistant professor of mathematics in the history of the University of California, Berkeley. Many expected him to have a distinguished academic career. However, after only 2 years, he abruptly resigned from what many considered a dream job and returned to Illinois to live with his parents. Not long after leaving Illinois, Ted Kaczynski moved to a remote mountain in Montana and lived a nearly primitive, self-sufficient lifestyle. His cabin had no electricity, no communication devices, and no running water, and he relied entirely on growing or hunting his own food. When survival became difficult, he occasionally did manual labor to support himself. No one knew why he chose this life, giving up a promising future to live in such harsh conditions. He remained in this isolated cabin for several years, where he built bombs and carried out his mail bomb attacks. Ted Kaczynski had always been a disciplined and highly intelligent child. Though somewhat introverted, he was raised in a stable family and was not influenced by negative peers. So why did such a promising student become a criminal? Investigations and biographies have suggested several contributing factors. At age 17, while at Harvard, Ted participated in a psychological study. The study involved deliberately humiliating and psychologically stressing participants to observe their reactions, aiming to test human endurance under pressure. Ted endured daily ridicule and criticism, which challenged his self-esteem, values, and worldview. The study lasted for 3 years. Although Kaczynski later claimed the experiment had little personal effect, some scholars believe it may have influenced his thinking. His 35,000-word manifesto argued that the Industrial Revolution and technological progress threatened human freedom, eroded morality, and weakened the human spirit. Kaczynski called for a return to a simpler, more natural way of life, and he deliberately targeted scientists and engineers, those advancing technological progress, in his attacks. He framed his personal grievances within a broader critique of industrial society, which he believed justified his violent actions. And that concludes the story of the Unabomber case.